Please welcome the panel on Latin America's Technological Renaissance, Leading the Global Digital Wave, moderated by CEO of DXA Invest, Oscar Decotelli.
All right, everyone, good morning. I'd like to first thank the Milken Institute for giving us this amazing space here to talk about Latin America and how technology is transforming the landscape. And I'd like to also point out that's so interesting when we talk about Latin America, when we think from a commodity standpoint, number one exporter in sugar, coffee, all sorts of different products. And when we think about Latin America, we think about it has the largest forest in the world. So basically, Latin America feeds and gives air to everybody around the world. But when we're talking about technology, investments, and how money's been driven towards the region, the story is very different. When we think about, in terms of percentage of Latin America GDP that's comprised of technology companies, we're talking about roughly 1.8%. This number in India is about 11%. If we were just to catch up to India, that would be about $600 billion of value creation, right? And then when we think about that, how are exits? So Latin America has had 50% more exits over $1 billion valuation than India. So this is a type of arbitrages that we're seeing, and I think I'm very happy to be here with such amazing panelists here also, entrepreneurs with exits, and I'm always saying that experience is amazing because we all have successes and failures. And at the end of the day, that's what really makes it interesting. So my name is Oscar Decotelli. I run DXA Group. We're an investments platform. We have two sides of our business. One is an asset management side. We've raised and deployed about $300 million in Latin America. Throughout my career, I've raised and deployed about $2.5 billion in Latin America. The other side of our business is a kind of online platform that facilitates investments in private markets, trying to connect managers, advisors, and investors. So our panel is going to be a panel that's going to go in the following way. Everybody's going to have about 2 minutes to talk about themselves first. Then we're going to go to specific questions about their businesses. They'll be able to kind of give more insights. And if we have some time, we'll go through our common themes and discuss. And we want it to be very Latino style, so we can talk and kind of get interactions between ourselves, all right? So start with Juan. So Juan, can you please kind of give a little bit of an overview of what you do? And then we'll go to Florian, Carol, Scott, and everybody. Please, Juan.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'm Juan José Galnares. I'm the president at Clip. And what we do at Clip is pretty simple. We basically empower every merchant to accept all payment forms, all available payment forms, in 5 minutes or less through our hardware and software. And this has allowed us to be probably one of the best financial inclusion stories in a developing market like Mexico. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Florian?
Thanks, Oscar. Thanks also to the Milken Institute. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Florian. I'm an entrepreneur and investor. I'm currently running a VC firm that I founded 7 years ago, focused on early stage opportunities, mostly in Brazil, but also across Latin America. In a previous life or a current life, also an entrepreneur. I started my first company in 2012 when the internet market in Brazil was just kind of getting started. A lot of it also done by foreigners at the time, starting companies. I'm originally from Germany myself, but I grew up in Brazil. Sold that first company to an American company that wanted to come into Brazil. And after that, started Canary. And then past couple of years, been running a company called Loft in the real estate space. Actually share a few connections with other panelists here, and pleasure to be here with everyone.
Nice. Carol, please.
Hi, my name is Caroline Merin. Really excited to be here. I am the founder and CEO of a very new company called Leona Health. We're focused on radically simplifying access to high-quality healthcare in Latin America, and we're building on WhatsApp, which is sort of the operating system of the region. So you can write to us 24/7. Our doctors respond in 3 minutes or less. And this is sort of the first step in our journey to make it much easier for people to get access to high quality care. previous to founding Leona, I'm originally from the US, but I've been in Latin America for about 10 years. I first came to the region with Uber. I opened Uber ride sharing in Uruguay and Argentina, and then I moved to Mexico about 8 years ago to open Uber Eats in the region. I was the general manager of Uber Eats for several years before I joined Rappi, which is the largest on-demand delivery app in the region. And I was the COO at Rappi for 5 years and left about a year ago to start Leona.
Nice, Carol. Thank you very much. Scott?
Yeah, first I want to thank Oscar for you for hosting the panel here and the Milken Institute for having myself and Valor Capital Group to participate here today. So thank you. I founded Valor Capital Group in 2011 as a pioneer cross-border venture fund, originally focused on Brazil, but now broader Latin America and bridging it with the rest of the global tech market. We have a very, eclectic group of partners, from diplomats to individuals that opened up Google and PayPal in Brazil and throughout Latin America. We have some entrepreneurs and technologists, and actually most recently the former CEO of PayPal joined us as a managing partner. I like to think it's a little bit about what we're doing, but I think it's more about where we're doing it, which we're all going to talk about here today. But to fast forward today, we have about 120 portfolio companies sitting across 6 different funds, 80% in Brazil, and we also invest in U.S. tech companies and help them land and expand in the region. We're a generalist fund, but a lot of what we focus on is fintech and software, a lot of enterprise, and we'll get into that today. But super excited about the moment that we're in, not only as a firm, but the market. We'll talk about the market in more detail. And also, I like to say it's very difficult to market time venture capital, but you have to be aware of innovation cycles, and I think we're sitting in the middle of one of the most transformative ones that I've ever seen with AI and blockchain and other technologies, which we'll talk about today. But that's a quick intro. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Leo?
Thank you, Oscar. I'm Leo. I'm from Brazil. I'm an entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Future Cow. And we are on a mission to make milk with no cows.
It's a very challenging mission, and happy to see that you guys are thriving on it. So it's an interesting panel. As you can see, we have 3 individuals here that were not born in Latin America. Carol, Florian, and Scott could be investing anywhere around the world, but they chose to dedicate their time, lives, money, everything, reputation, to invest there, and everybody with great successes. We're going to talk a little bit. So now we're going to dip deep in a little bit, dive into each one of the firms, and I want to start with you, Juan. So you're in Mexico and talking about how you bring finance to these small businesses and Clip, the whole kind of a success story. Can you tell us a little bit more about that environment and how it was the whole kind of acquiring in a box, that process that you guys did?
Sure. I mean, to begin with, Mexico is one of the most laggards in terms of digital acceptance payments, right? 85% of the payments in the country is still done by cash today. So what we did were basically 3 main things, right? The first one is we had a great product, right? If you look at the app stores, Clip's app is among the most top ranked, or the highest ranked for the past 5 years, right? So the product works, which is not the usual case in Latin America to begin with. Second, we have a great customer service, right? So if you call our company, somebody, actually a human, picks up the phone in 20 seconds or less, right? And that's because still today, 75% of the people we onboard are first to payments. It's the first time they transact a digital payment in their life. And I think lastly, we have had a great distribution, right? So just to give you context, you can find Clip hardware in 30,000 points of sale, right? In 30,000 places. Just for context, there's 13,000 Starbucks in the US.
Yeah.
So accessibility has been key for us, and we were able to navigate accessibility in a developing market. And lastly, all of this educational work that we've done to make sure that we show what financial inclusion is, what the product does, has rewarded us, and we have been recognized as one of the top brands in Mexico, not by ourselves, but by third parties. So that's the combination in a nutshell.
And when scaling that, you were able to set up a team that's predominantly in Mexico, but I imagine they were doing this for the first time also. How was that process, and what was your experience of bringing this kind of mentality and making sure that the team was on track on this kind of a scaling process?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things. I would say there's three things. First one is I always tell that the company is a different company every 4 to 6 months, and it's a reality. So you have to change the org structure, you have to change the business units, you have to change the processes. So that's a reality. Number two, and it might sound emotional, but I think you have to have a higher purpose, and people need to be on board with that, right? And Latin America, you were mentioning, it's desperate for success stories. So if you're building a disruptive company that can be a success story for a country that desperately needs it, I think that's inspirational, and you need to transmit that. And finally, I think, it's not the strongest, it's the most adaptive. And I think you have to be flexible and you have to adapt. There's no playbook to do a fintech in Mexico.
Yeah.
It's simply there's not. So you have to build it.
Very interesting, yeah. And then I want to pull Florian into this discussion also as an entrepreneur, and the process you've done with Printy, with Aloft, also this same kind of a challenge. Did you see the same kind of process when you were an entrepreneur there, kind of a vision and putting people together on this track?
For sure, yeah. I think for our first company, we started it in 2012. We exited by 2017, 18. So for that cycle, the market was a lot more scarce for talent, for capital, all of that. I guess some people here were around for that already and will remember how scarce things were back then. Then, when we started Loft, we went through, my co-founder and I went through a period of deciding, should we move to the US to start a big company or should we stay in Brazil? I'm relatively close to the Brex founders. They're Brazilian. They moved to the Valley in 2017 because they said we can't really build anything large in Brazil. And I felt that at that time things were shifting. I saw that the talent flow was shifting and people were moving from more traditional careers into being interested in technology companies, into purpose-driven companies, like Juan mentioned. And so we were seeing that very clearly on the ground. And then my bet was that the capital flow would also start shifting, soon. That was in 2018. And then obviously when SoftBank came in with the LatAm fund, that was, I think, I don't know, it was like the last 5 years of venture capital times 3 in one fund.
Changer, yeah.
So it was a little bit of an anomaly, and it has corrected since. But certainly, the capital flows since 18, 19 have been there, and as I'm sure a lot of other people here can attest to, you can build large disruptive companies in Latin America, both from the talent and the capital side now, which wasn't the reality 10 years ago.
And your last firm was priced above $1 billion, and then that kind of gave you this whole idea of investing in other entrepreneurs, that you have the same kind of a mentality, you can spot them, and I understand that that's kind of more what you do at Canary. Right. And could you tell a little bit about what you've been looking at and what excites you the most when you're looking at these entrepreneurs at Canary?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually what happened was after we sold our first company, people started coming and asking us for advice. It wasn't a massive outcome. It wasn't $1 billion outcome, but it was a profitable outcome for us. We sold the company, our investors made money, we made money, everyone was happy. And that was at a time when there weren't a lot of success stories. So a lot of entrepreneurs started looking for mentorship, for advice. And so Mate and I, we started initially angel investing in 2014 was our first angel investment. And that gave birth to Canary, because we saw that we could organize this investing in a vehicle, provide support to these companies, and actually do it in a professional way, rather than we were just doing this as angel groups and everyone was putting in a little bit. And so that's really what gave birth to Canary. The firm is now 7 years old, and we've continued doing the same thing, early stage investing.
You're on which fund now?
We're in Fund 3, about to raise Fund 4.
And total size of capital you guys have raised and deployed in the Canary thesis?
Total AUM is about 350 million. Last fund is $110 million. And what we do is early stage investing. We're very comfortable with, the idea risk, call it, at the pre-seed. But our core is probably more the seed, when there's already a team, a product, some evidence that it's working. And just trying to back very talented people. 80% is about the team, 20% about the idea. Very important to understand the right team for the right idea, or why did that particular founder decide to build that particular company at that particular time. That's a very important attribute. And mostly focused on Brazil, but we will do LatAm opportunistically.
Would you say that the Latin American entrepreneurs, they had a very reluctance to fail, and then today, by bringing firms like yours, it facilitates to take the risk of putting those ideas into place and everything. Just like SoftBank changed the landscape on the later stage, you guys been kind of focusing a lot on doing on this change on the early stage also.
I think we had quite the impact. I mean, Scott might attest to this, but we share a company called Boozer. It's an intercity bus marketplace business. And when we first met the founder, he needed $500,000 basically to get the idea off the ground and to have lawyers on his team to fight the regulator. And we gave him a check for that, naturally at an attractive entry price for us, and all good. But I would say it wasn't common for funds to take that kind of innovation risk before Canary arrived. But I think Scott can confirm or deny.
I will attest to that in a moment, yes.
And I think the interesting part of scaling and investing to early stage and seeing kind of the challenges, sometimes you need to fight the government and to change legislation. It kind of connects a little bit with what you did, right, Carol, which has been kind of for Rappi, for Uber in these regions, and kind of starting Uber Eats. Could you comment a little bit about your background of like seeing an entrepreneur? And I always like to give the perspective on American going there, seeing how different was it? And then also tell us a little bit about kind of your new firm.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what originally brought me to Latin America is the same reason why I'm still there 10 years later, which is the immense opportunity. So I actually joined Uber in the US, but there were still a couple of large markets in Latin America. We hadn't launched the business yet. And they were intimidating markets from a regulatory perspective, from the strength of the taxis there. But once we got there and got the business off the ground, we were filling such a necessary unmet need that the demand was just insane. I mean, when we launched Uber Eats in Mexico City, we did 44,000 orders the first week, which gives you an idea of this sort of like pent up demand that was there that wasn't met by anyone else. And so I originally went thinking it would be an adventure. I would be there for about a year. Here I am 10 years later because I still see that same opportunity. And I also think, as Florian was alluding to, there has been a lot more success. When I moved there 10 years ago, we were really tech wasn't as big of a thing as it is now. I'm based in Mexico City, and now you see so many incredible entrepreneurs from all over the world that want to be in Mexico City, that want to be building there. And so I think, of course, there are challenges, but where there are challenges, there's more opportunity. Because if you can work through those, you're unlocking a big need in the market. So I spent most of my career over the last 10 years focused on on-demand delivery, on ride sharing. And, when I decided I really wanted to build a business myself, I truly was sector agnostic. I was much more focused on where are the biggest problems that haven't been solved yet. And this idea to build in healthcare actually came from a very personal pain point. I have 2 young children. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And anyone who's had young children or has young children knows you go to the doctor a lot.
Yeah.
And it was expensive and frustrating. And I started doing research, and I just discovered some dynamics in the market that were really surprising. For example, in Mexico, about 70% of medical spend is out of pocket. That is dramatically different than a market like the US. In the US, about 93% of the population has access to some type of insurance. In Mexico, that number is less than 7%. And so really the financial burden of care is on the consumer. And what ends up happening is people don't go to the doctor unless they're very sick. And so as a result, you have a much sicker population. So if you look at rates of diabetes, obesity, gastrointestinal disease, cardiovascular disease, you see that they're very high. And, I had spent almost 10 years bringing extreme convenience to people in other areas of their life. Through Rappi, you can now get groceries delivered in 10 minutes or less. You can have someone go to your house and give you a massage or cut your hair. But when it comes to healthcare, which is such an important, necessary thing, it's stressful, intimidating, highly inconvenient. But at the same time, Latin America, and this is what makes it such an exciting place to build, has certain dynamics. For example, the fact that it's not such an insurance-led market means you can actually solve for patient outcomes instead of trying to optimize for who's the payer and what do they want. Also, we're building on WhatsApp. As I mentioned, you have 90 million smartphone users in Mexico, 89 million WhatsApp users. That is where everyone is. And the current regulatory environment allows you to build on WhatsApp. So we actually prescribe medication, can fully diagnose and do all of this in a really innovative way that might be harder to do in other markets that are regulated more highly. And so I saw this opportunity. I know healthcare is hard, but someone needs to solve it.
No, very
and
nice.
I love the idea of working on something that can drive such a big impact. I'll close by saying I think the other thing that makes Latin America such an exciting place to build is that the type of problems that you can work on are just massive, highly impactful problems because there aren't quite as many entrepreneurs. There isn't quite as much capital. I think we're still at a stage where you can come build, and hopefully 10 years from now, we'll be sitting here and see that we've radically transformed how easy it is for people to get access to high quality care, and as a result, have a healthier population. So I think that's very motivating to me and is what has kept me in the region.
And Carol, Milken Institute and the global conference is probably the #1 place for everybody who has any kind of power or influence in the world of finance, of markets, of healthcare, everything. So what are the challenges that you are currently facing or looking at that you want to kind of grow, and that this audience should be hearing about this, right? To look into the region there.
Yeah, I think overall in the region, it's just important to take the time to understand every individual country and the dynamics. Of course, you have Latin America as a region, which is really exciting, and I very much am building a business that we actually already have customers in 5 different countries without even intending for that to be the case. So I think you can build a business that crosses borders. That being said, Mexico is a very different country than Brazil, which is a very different country than Colombia. So I think that is something that's important to understand and spend the time
connecting
kind
more.
Of connecting. And then the other thing I would highly encourage is come visit. We're in LA right now. Mexico City is a 3.5-hour flight. It's surprisingly close.
Yeah.
I think once you're on the ground, you really see this incredible opportunity, the caliber of entrepreneurs and investors on the ground. I think so many people, both in a professional context and a personal context, when they come to Mexico City, they're so pleasantly surprised, which may sound silly, but I think that the region has been through such an incredible wave of change over the last 10, 15 years that things look really different than maybe what the reputation or perceptions are. And so I highly recommend getting on a plane and coming to see things firsthand.
Well, somebody that did get on a plane and saw and made like a big difference in his life was Scott, right? Decided to focus in investing in Latin America. So Scott, you guys do a lot of different things. You're very kind of broad in terms of the exposure that you have. Could you comment a little bit about the opportunities and what's like spotting the next big thing, and maybe give us a couple of examples of different firms, and I'll get into a second question also quite soon.
Sure, and it's interesting because there's so many things we could touch upon based on what everyone just shared here. I'll take a step back because it's important to understand where the market has come from to where it is today and where we think it's going to go. But when we started investing in Brazil primarily, there was less than $200 million that went into Brazil in venture capital in around 2010. It's 20x that growth.
Yeah.
But it's still very lightly served today. And you were giving some stats earlier. If you compare it to India, it receives 1/6 the amount of venture funding on an annual basis. But if you look at the publicly traded VC-backed tech companies, their market capitalization is 3 times greater in Latin America than the Indian companies. And there's a lot of reasons for that, I think. And we probably all have our views on why that is the case. I think it has a lot to do with the talent. The talent was there. It has grown and matured. I also think it has a lot to do with the institutions.
Yeah.
And our firm plays at the cross-section of policy, regulation. I'm happy we're talking about regulation here because it is really important. And also, and where technology and innovation plays a role within policy and regulation. And that's what I think gave us our early confidence in what we did in Brazil. Just understanding that environment, understanding how entrepreneurs were looking to create opportunities within those challenging environments. And some of our early investments, particularly in the financial services and fintech space, played on the opening and deregulation of the financial services sector being driven by the central bank. One of our first investments in a company called Stone ended up listing on the NASDAQ in 2018, co-anchored by Warren Buffett and Jack Ma. And I think it was one of the largest fintech IPOs in history up until that point in time.
Yeah.
But I often say, capital will chase talent and outcomes. You need to have outcomes. And that was one of the first big outcomes. There's others that have happened since then, like Nubank and VTEX and others. And I think that is starting a new cycle. And I think that cycle will evolve from Brazil to Mexico and throughout the region. That gives us a lot of excitement for where we are now. Going back to a point Florian made, Mexico and Brazil have such large domestic economies that businesses don't have to go beyond their borders. But for venture capitalists like ourselves, you want to look at opportunities that can be global. And there's been no shortage of those types of opportunities. We've had several investments that we've made that have gone from Brazil throughout Latin America, globally as well. And then now we're seeing investments we've made from Mexico that have gone to Brazil. And we like to build bridges, our firm. And if we can build them, pan-regionally, or we can build them globally, that's what we like to do. But the market is hitting an inflection point right now, and I think now I'll go to a point that Carolina made. I think there's a little bit of a perception versus reality issue.
Definitely.
And you don't see the realities unless you're in the market. And the first thing you have to do is you got to get on a plane and go there. And they're short distances, some of them from here to Mexico, for instance. But you can't just read the headlines, because the headlines are not going to tell the true story. They're going to tell the story that the media want to cover to get views, but that's usually
sells, right. That's what normally happens.
It's usually about safety and security and these things. But there's a different reality that's happening there. And I'll end this and I'll let you ask another question.
Yeah.
To where we are today as well, maybe a little bit of where we're going from here from a market perspective. But there are real geopolitical shifts that are impacting, global geopolitical shifts that are impacting the region in a meaningful way. Yes, there's friction between the U.S. and China, and that's driving a lot of nearshoring opportunities to Mexico and throughout the region. And it's very real. I mean, the foreign direct investment is up significantly and can continue to be up significantly in Mexico as a result of that. But it also has to do, I think, a little bit less on the shortcomings that are happening in that situation and with China, but also to the health of the domestic economy in Mexico. Inflation is stemmed, interest rates are down. The peso has appreciated significantly. We have to be macro sensitive. That's, as venture capitalists, we have to be macro sensitive, but we're micro focused. And if you look at the micro, you're talking about a huge amount of the population that does not have bank accounts, that don't have access to credit. Credit, I think, in Mexico is the lowest across the entire region. So those are enormous opportunities for entrepreneurs like Juan and others to address. So we're super excited about what's happening from a macro standpoint to the micro opportunities. And you just have to be in the market, to your point, to realize those opportunities and to lean into them.
Nice. There's a Harvard Business School study showing that diverse founders, they tend to have more resilience. And in essence, once you've gone through difficulties along your life, you're going to be able to persist. Latin America is filled with that, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted for you to touch a little bit on your experience. You could be investing everywhere. You guys invest in US tech also. And maybe comment a little bit about Gympass, an investment you guys been involved for a long time, and that's now taking the globe, right? So tell us a little bit more about that story.
I'll go to the resilience point, and I'll use an example. And I don't know if this is the best example to use, but it's a true one. So we have, majority of our portfolio in Latin America, but we do have some investments we've made here in the U.S. and have helped them expand to the region. And if you look at the Silicon Valley Bank situation, a little over a year ago now, and it was interesting to see all of our Latin American entrepreneurs reacted faster than anyone.
Really interesting.
They were able to get their money out right away.
It's so hard to get, so you better kind of protect them, right?
Well, they're used to these micro cycles.
Yeah, it's true.
They're used to hyperinflation. They're used to bank runs. This is in the history. It's in the DNA. So when there is any inclination in the U.S., they're like, "Oh, that could never happen."
Yeah.
Our money is fine. Like, it was a situation where everyone ended up being okay.
Yeah.
But it was a little bit in the DNA of the LatAm entrepreneur. And so that's just one thing to comment on. And
it creates a breed of entrepreneurs that can then take the world, right?
Yeah, so I'll go there in 1 second, but it's also how they're building their businesses. So now in the cycle that we're looking at right now, many have moved to becoming profitable sooner, and they can control their own destiny when they do that. Because there's a scarcity of venture capital, and there continues to be. And so I think and I think that drives to, I'll go to your point right now, it drives to different business models. So there was a cycle where we saw, and Florian could attest to this, where there was a lot of copy and paste, and it's working. There's a business model that's working here in the US. It's going to work there with some tropicalization, some adaptation of it. But then we went into this business innovation cycle, right, where, to the company you're talking about, Gympass, for instance, Brazil has one of the largest networks of fitness centers and gyms in the world. But a lot of mom and pop, small, highly fragmented part. So Cesar, the founder, was brilliant. He said, I'm going to aggregate them together. Initially, he had a model where he offered them to the consumers, where he offered on kind of daily, weekly basis, where he can get access to the network. But that wasn't scaling, growing cost effectively, because then you'd have to market that, and there wasn't any capital in the market. So he got creative. Said, I'm going to go out to the largest companies in the country, and I'm going to develop a benefits platform, a wellness benefit platform, where then they will give it to their employees on a tiered and discounted level. Well, fast forward to today, they have 55,000 gyms around the world, part of this network. They have thousands of corporate clients, and they got millions of lives on this platform. And they've gone from not just physical gyms and fitness centers, but also doing things online, digitally, and mental health. So they just rebranded the platform, WellHub, And they are, I can't talk about the financials of the business, but they're preparing for an IPO.
Nice.
It should happen relatively soon. So I'm going to wrap up with this because I know we're running out of time and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but Gympass was part of that business innovation cycle. And I think Loft played in that too, where you were addressing these large, fragmented, and inefficient industries, driving productivity and cost savings and digitalization. So you have that going on right now. Now we're at a really nice inflection point. Back to the first point I made earlier about what's happening with AI and blockchain. There's another company of ours that started in Brazil. It's kind of a next generation payment processor, merchant acquirer. Similar to Stone, as I mentioned earlier, but is building on a different type of tech stack. It's a company called CloudWalk. And CloudWalk is targeting small merchants today in Brazil, but is just launching in the United States. And they're growing at like 5,000 merchants per day. The business is generating over 700 million in revenue, and back to my profitability point, 70 million in net income. It's highly productive, and now he's like, I want to take this global. But how can he take it global? How can he compete with the Squares and other payment companies here in the US and around the world? He built his entire infrastructure on a blockchain, their own. That's allowing, and they have a AI fraud detection platform that's allowing them to do real-time settlement. For very small merchants, that's really important from a cash flow standpoint, and to be able to do that. So that's this next cycle that we're seeing in Latin America that we're super excited about, where they're really leaning into technology. They're able to develop these innovative technologies there. And it's a super exciting
No, it's
moment.
very exciting, Scott. Thank you very much. And I think this year's Milken conference all about building a shared future, right? And how this innovation is driving this future. We all remember here how COVID was, and we had a shared presence of like despair. How can we turn this into be a shared future of positiveness, and how we can change? It does connect to health. We saw Mike Milken talking to Dr. Cohen from the CDC 2 days ago, and talking at how health is something that's coming to the level of the military importance in this country here. And when we talk about Leo's business with FutureCal, right? I think it connects completely to this future of ours that's in the verge of climate, of health, everything, how this is going to become more and more of a reality. So Leo, like making a milk without a cow, that sounds quite exciting. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and how does that actually happen?
Sure. We look inside of the cow's DNA, and we found a genetic sequence for instruction on how to make milk protein. We copy the instruction and code a host, like a fungi, a yeast, or even a bacteria. So then they start produce the milk protein. We move them to a precision fermentation tank, which is very similar way we do in beer and wine, which also is a natural process. But instead of have beer and wine, you have the milk protein that can be used as ingredient for the food, dairy, or even pharmaceutical industries.
Interesting. And from where I understand, you guys are on the process of, just like we saw with electrical batteries and electric cars coming down in terms of the cost, you guys have a verge that this is going to be even cheaper than the natural version?
Yeah, first feasibility indicates that we're going to have a lower cost compared to the animal production. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, the cows are not very good in making milk. And I'm going to give you 3 examples.
Okay.
If you buy a calf today, we need to raise it about a year, and that means lunch stock, water, label,
grains, right?
Exactly. So it can produce the first liter of milk or 40 grams of protein. We can make the same protein in 72 hours.
Wow.
And also we expect to reduce up to 97% of CO2 emission, 99% of water consumption, and up to 6% of use of the energy.
That's very interesting.
Second, if you think about space, the use of space. Or feasibility indicate that in about 5,000 square foot, so think like a space like the size of this room, you'll be able to produce the same casein compared of 90,600 cows.
Wow.
So imagine put 90,000 cows in here,
Yeah.
it's not be possible. So third, a technology opportunity for the food and dairy industry to cut one step of the supply chain and reduce all the logistic and all the environment impact associated with traditional dairy.
Interesting. And your technology has been developed in Brazil, but it can work anywhere around the world, though.
Exactly. Right. We start from Brazil. We have a lab in Brazil. We have developed the technology in Brazil with a Brazilian science woman, and to start the market over there, we have a very good feedback for the industry. But eventually, you want to look abroad as well.
No, thank you very much. I want to tell the audience, we're going to get now into common themes. If you have a question, feel free to use the QR code, and I have already a couple of questions here, and we're going to start touching upon that. So thank you, Leo. Guys, I know we've gone through a lot of these common themes when we're discussing here, right? And I want to touch upon a couple of different things, right? So I think the first one, we did talk about how hard it is to be an entrepreneur in Latin America, and how if you see it from the angle, it's going to be too difficult, let's not invest into that. You're kind of missing out on a huge opportunity, right? If you see it from the diverse and from the persistent side, you see like amazing, let's put money there. But I want to talk a little bit more about how technology and specifically AI is driving this, right? And how technology, we saw Elon Musk talking about Starlink, for instance, and how they have, I think, about 6,000 different satellites already around the country, around the globe, and that allows that any country can have people working from remote areas also. And that's shifting how kind of labor and work they go about. But I wanted to use these two things, AI, connectivity anywhere around the world, and how this is going to shape Latin America, right? So we have a lot of businesses in the US that have big teams there in Latin America, and also some changes. Like so, Juan, I'll start with you, right? And if you look at companies like Klarna that came out saying that they took, 600, 700 people out of their consumer facing using AI. How is this changing your business, and how this is driving it? And again, this is a common theme. Everybody can jump in. I know, Scott, you've been talking a lot about that in the news also, so let's kind of collaborate on it.
Sure. I mean, for us, we obviously acknowledged generative AI, and we believe there's three areas that it will impact us. One is, as you mentioned, customer service. I mean, everything can be automated and it can be much more smarter and better, and we're working on that. The other one, and I think it's more on the back end, it's developing, right? Software developing, it can also shortcut a lot of the basic coding, or it can help you solve coding problems faster and easier. And I also think there's applications across services, back-end services for the company, right? That's the way we see it. Being a consumer-facing company, we see it more on the services side and on the developing internally on software. And
the WhatsApp chats, right, Carol? You guys are probably using a lot of AI with that mentality also, right?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really interesting in healthcare, so I'll comment specifically on healthcare and then also the impact I see specifically in Latin America. AI, I think, can be used very effectively already for a lot of kind of the more time-consuming administrative processes. So rather than the care delivery, you have the doctors focus on care delivery, but things like summarizing a chat into a medical record, that's something that AI can be really helpful with. Even there's so much information online around different diagnoses, conditions, medicines you can prescribe. Using AI to synthesize that and suggest diagnoses, I think, is something that we're excited about, but more as a co-pilot for the doctor than acting as a doctor. We actually still feel very strongly that doctors should be the ones doing the care delivery, but I think it's a big way to enable. Also, as you think about, we're currently based in Mexico City, and that's where we're focused at the moment. But if you look throughout Latin America and you go outside of the largest metropolitan areas, just the access to the most up-to-date medical information that doctors or care providers have is quite poor. And that's something that AI can really help with in terms of serving as this co-pilot for the doctors and helping them get better access to information. So I think I'm very excited about what that future looks like. I think AI is going to be a huge enabler for us to eventually be able to lower cost of care and be able to provide it to millions of people. The other thing I would say specifically in Latin America is that I think AI can be a great equalizer in a lot of ways. I think historically, because cost of labor is lower in Latin America, one thing that's happened to us, those who've been building in the region, is sometimes it's easier to hire people to do things that you could be building tech to do. And I think AI, I already see this with the entrepreneurs that are building right now. You kind of get on the same level as the way that, you're not competing for developer talent. You could be, but rather than having to worry about, can I hire the developer talent I need locally, AI lets you to do a lot of that. So I think in a lot of ways, it's going to be a great equalizer to allow companies that are building in the region to compete on a global scale in a way that maybe wasn't possible previously.
And Florian and Scott, what kind of companies are you guys seeing putting into applications this that Carol and Juan just said? Is it on your pipeline today? Is it majority already has AI? Is it 10%, 20%, 80%? Can you comment a bit on what's been that experience?
Want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So we spent a lot of time thinking about where the value could accrue in Latin America when you talk about AI, and naturally, when you look at the overall AI stack, you have the hardware chips at the bottom, and then you go through the foundational models, AI tooling, and then the application layer, and that's kind of where Caroline's building. We believe the opportunity is more in the application layer. AI actually being a way of maybe building a company or writing software rather than an end thing in and of itself. We are actually quite excited, like Caroline mentioned, about the equation of cost to acquire a customer and cost to serve a customer. I think the story in the United States on generative AI is very much a labor shortage story. And in Brazil, I think it's much more of a cost to serve, and it's expanding your markets. I mean, we've seen in the last 10 years a lot of companies that have thought the TAM was bigger than it ultimately was, because we always have to be conscious of the fact that Latin America is a poor region. If you think about from a GDP per capita perspective, and except in a few exceptions like fintech, the markets are not massive. And so what we are interested in is how can AI expand markets, because the cost to serve is low enough that you can, have a bigger kind of customer base that you can tap into, and that's. And
the percentage in the pipeline, is it big percentages that you've seen? Yeah,
we are agnostic to verticals, so we kind of follow where the talent goes, where the most talented founders go. I would say that 1 out of 3 talented teams today is interested in AI kind of topics, and even those that are not specifically AI, they certainly should leverage AI nativeness and how they build their company in a more productive way. And I think that's definitely, completely agree with Caroline, a definitely new paradigm to building companies going forward. And, labor's cheap, but developers are paid in US dollars effectively, right? So it's an interesting
very
moment.
Exciting, guys. We're running a little bit of time. Maybe, Scott, could you come in and give some final comments?
I think everyone just got some great answers on what we're seeing from an AI perspective in Latin America. I like the point where you went to on 1 out of 3. I would actually say, and it's you see this in kind of hype curves. I think every new presentation you see, it's some form of AI. So that's definitely something you're seeing. But there's people that are building natively, and there's others that, because every business is being impacted by AI. So that's clear, and it's definitely the opportunities we're seeing in Latin America are not at the LLM levels. That's pretty much decided on where that's and how that's going to play out. It's on the application layers. We're seeing that. I'll just transition for a moment to what we're seeing from a Web3 blockchain standpoint, because Brazil is a leader in the world in this. It's being driven by the central bank. You think about it, there's not many central banks around the world that are as progressive and driving that technology and driving innovation through that technology. And they're doing it from an inclusionary standpoint. That's the mission, central bank. Pix is a platform, it's a peer-to-peer payment platform that was launched several years ago that has been the fastest growing fintech application in the world.
Yeah.
Everybody in the country transacts on Pix. You can buy coconut water on the beach. I don't know if you want to be carrying your phone on the beach in Copacabana, but
it's about 43% of Brazilians use Pix every single day. Just to give you
if WhatsApp and Pix go down, the economy goes down. It's really talks about how mobile and digital the country is. That's being driven by the central bank. So the next iteration of that off of the Pix infrastructure is what they're doing with their CBDC, central bank digital currency, through this DREX platform. And that's going to change the rails for the financial services industry globally, being led out of Brazil. Yeah. So I just want to comment on that in addition to the AI points that everyone else made.
Look, guys, our time is up. Thank you very much, everybody, for the time, for the comments. What I do think is that here we're talking about private markets. Public markets, the number of listed companies are reducing more every year. And then all of a sudden, you don't invest in private markets in Latin America, then all of a sudden there's a new bank out there, and then you can't just buy the stock and get all the price and the value that we're doing in the private market. So I think the whole idea is that you need to go to entrepreneurs. There's a lot of experienced people here. I want to thank you, everybody, and thank the Milken Institute also for putting this amazing panel together. Thank you very much. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.